Greetings and salutations. Too long, old friend. You're looking well. Almost too well. Yes, these reps at in real time, normal speed, I fancy. Good to see you at it. And just starting my attack run, really. Lovely to have a bit of really high resolution footage to dip into. So looking forward to that. This particular swing, not selected at random, because this was the swing where we were billed. You quoted this one. I think it was the first one on the reel, actually, from the down the line angle. You quoted an into out path of 3 degrees and a face open to target of 3 degrees, which I believe I'm right in saying would mean the face and path were basically married. So we should have seen a straight push. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you said seven yards or so to the right of the target, which would make a lot of sense. That would sound about right. So those numbers ring true. So I'm going to go with it that this is more. I'm going to take the perspective that this swing has the characteristics that we probably want, rather than looking for, what's wrong with it. So, somewhat hypocritically, I would say let's check in with a few staples. If we look at where your centre of gravity is poised from down the line, back of your armpits, sort of quite a way out over your knees. So as a result of your body sort of tipping forwards, incidentally, good posture maintained there, but as a result of tipping your centre of gravity forward sort of almost vertically above your tippy toes, I think that straightened your legs quite a bit, and that straightening of your legs might inhibit rotation, but then so would excessive knee flex. But I think what would happen is if your centre of gravity moved slightly that way, sort of backwards and upwards, slightly in that direction, sorry about the numbers, then I think correspondingly you get a little bit more knee flex, and your knees would flex a tad more, crude drawing of your knees flexing more, but you get the idea. So if this part of your body moved backwards and upwards a little bit as you were sort of standing a little taller, shall we say, and I think correspondingly you'd get a little bit more knee flex occur, and then we'd end up with your centre of gravity more vertically above your kneecaps, which is kind of where in a perfect world you'd see it. But I have to say, you look at people, I'm reminded of Ryan Fox. He sort of has quite a pronounced sort of, not really a stoop, but just sort of tipped over forwards quite a lot. Justin Thomas, another one who stoops, sort of tips forwards quite a bit, but he's not crazy. I mean, so I'm not going to get out of my tree about it. Anyway, arms hanging directly downwards. We talked about, I mentioned your posture just then, so nice to see that sort of back in good condition. No kind of mega curvature to the top part of your spine, which is nice. Like it really. Not much of a beef with it. Let's just chuck in the old classic. That'll go again straight through your centre of gravity, which again, admittedly, is probably vertically above your toes a little bit, but the intersection of your centre of gravity and that line I just drew there and your swing plane, we've gotten used to looking at things like that. Or from that perspective, it's just a very simple way to take stock, see how the club works up. Almost perfection. Oh, aye, it's lovely. Club. A lot of guys liking to see club outside the hands now. If you're familiar with the work of Joseph May and you're chipping, you wouldn't want to get the club in behind the hands. You haven't rotated the face excessively open. The right hand is fairly well on top of the shaft at this point, so everything going well, and the club head working almost perfectly on that line. It's almost as if you knew. Tad under, and again, I've tended to maintain that that's a counterbalance. If you're stooped a little bit, if your weight's a little bit forward out of your toes, the club might move back behind you a little bit as a counter to that, to give you a balanced feeling at the end of your backswing. So, but it's not absolute. Again, we've seen golfers succeed there. Possibly the angle of your shoulders a little bit flat. We might be able to encourage, the club, your shoulders rotating to a position where, the shoulder alignment is a little bit more parallel with the swing plane itself, which is often advocated. But I've not, over the years, in all my years, 28 years doing this now, I haven't necessarily noticed too terribly essential a correlation with that and success. Phil Mickelson's shoulders, for example, are very, very flat at the end of the backswing, sort of almost horizontal, and yet he plays sublime, or has played as sublime a golf as anyone over the years. So not going to get too bent out of shape about that either. Finishing off your backswing, again, so hands just a tiny tad under the archetypal plane, and the mass of the club just sort of vertically above your heels there, which again I think is only, the only subconscious, unconscious thing to be mindful of there is the counterbalancing. So if you've gained a little bit of height, and let's just check in on that, so your body's sort of instinctively moving backwards and upwards, that's really the only logical explanation, is that we're moving backwards and upwards a bit to try to sort of get that centre of gravity a little bit more vertically, sort of armpits above kneecaps, armpits above knees, should I say, which is, what you've achieved there, that kind of thing. But again, nitpicking, really, quite frankly. Gained a little bit of height, but like many a golfer, you'll start to lose a little bit of height, and you can see the sternum stays more or less, stable there. So pretty decent. Good dynamism, footwork, leg work. It's rare that I have to criticise you for not rotating enough sort of with the club on the right side of your body, which is a staple of proper ball strikers. Hence why we often like the way you strike it. It's just getting that little bit of continuity. And again, the club shaft a little bit above, running very parallel to the plane line, but slightly above it. A frame earlier, and you could argue it's bang on. So again, I tend to criticise that elbow popping out backwards a little bit rather than folding under. Minor criticisms these really are. So I would say keep doing what you're doing in the main. But no evidence there that the club is, it's certainly not. If we throw in a kind of parallel plane line there, just to be nice and thorough, let's sort of run a line that's running parallel with your swing plane. You can sort of wander off the archetypal path and join a path which is parallel to it, almost perfectly parallel, and then arriving from underneath and getting back on and slightly above. So that would explain those 3 degrees into out. And if the face and path are doing the same thing, they're going to get straight shots. So he might stand 3 degrees open and nut that swing, and long may you reign supreme. So that's fine. As for why the club gets a little bit over the top on the way forwards, I would prefer we thought of maybe standing a little bit taller and a little bit more knee flex, and that should promote rotation, because generally your change of direction, when it starts with the club head, the shaft, the hands, the arms, and they get back in front of you a little bit, it's going to be problematic with your swing path. You're going to get a degree or two from the outside, which is not always what you're after. But I think as a functional piece of work, mate, there's worse out there. I've seen worse, uglier swings, which churn out some dodgier numbers, getting people around the golf course. So, yeah, I think it's good. Front on, 2 different front on swings, and what struck me, excuse the pun, is the continuity. They're quite hard to tell apart. The setup is very routine there. Obviously a little bit of flair to the lead foot. It's very nice. Not too level in the shoulders. I don't like to see the shoulders level, obviously, because the right hand's lower than the left. So staple things, weight distribution looks pretty 50-50. It's pretty nice, but I think if we, spool it on a little bit, nice bit of togetherness there, things moving away together. I like to see a little bit of daylight between I'm going to change the colour of that. I like to see a little bit of daylight between the forearms at this point. A lack of daylight in the forearms if the right forearm, as we look at you, your right forearm disappears behind your left forearm. You're going to see deep backswings where the club's working around you too much and getting way flat. So I like that. You know, the club's about halfway through the backswing. We've got about half a shoulder rotation, which again, beautifully constructed. Big full rotation of the upper body, but not an overswing. So appropriate amounts of wrist hinge and forearm rotation. Keeping some brace in that right knee, that right leg not getting too straight. Don't like to see that too much. That's the bad old days sort of thing. But I think one of these, and sort of transitioning forwards, feels to me like you can see the sort of left hip travelling a tad towards the target. And that's, again, part and parcel of your rotation. It's nice, continuous and even rotation, pretty damn decent, have to say. But I was intrigued to note, we don't get excessive. You can with irons, of course. You can sort of move into this territory. But that really has been the kiss of death for your long clubs. We haven't been able to reliably use driver. So we plumped for a swing which stayed pretty centred and would work for both types of artillery. The only time I would sort of want to pull back on that is if we get almost backward shaft lean with your irons. And I think on this one, there's forward shaft lean there. It's certainly not leaning backwards. I mean, you might struggle with an argument that it's, vertical, but it's, for me, there's a little bit of forward lean there, so that's healthy as long as we strike ball, as long as the low point is after we've struck the ball, or at the ball, worst case scenario, that they're not before the ball, we're doing just fine. And we should get lots of competent strikes and decent stuff. So switching to the other swing. Now, the only way I could tell these apart is these fellows on the TV here. You look in the other piece of footage, they're not there. So I was literally struggling because the other spare balls you got there haven't moved in both images. So I was struggling when I downloaded them to tell them apart, giving rise to just how much consistency there is in your game these days. But what was interesting, I think with this one, there was less... Yeah, perhaps less. It's almost a whiff of backward lean there. It doesn't look as forward leaning. I can't quote you the numbers on these two. I'm being slightly lazy when it comes to identifying what the numbers were. But then I think that's why you pointed the screen towards the camera to make it feasible for us to see the numbers. But I just can't make them out, mate. They're just a bit blurred. I can't quite see them. It'd be so cool if I could see the numbers corresponding with each swing on the screen here, and we could look at them that way. I don't know whether there's any way to hook those up, but I mean, that's probably asking a little bit. I know there are probably some installations that do it, but yeah, maybe that one might have been a little bit more propensity on that one to have a little if there was turf interaction and it came before the ball, you might construe that one's a little bit heavy. Again, I don't really see massive yawning differences between the two. I wouldn't, with the irons, make a massive point of as big a point as staying behind that line as I would with you and the metalwoods these days. Haven't got any metalwood footage from you there, so that'd be quite nice to see at some interval in the coming weeks or days. Because I think, again, we can afford to shift more sideways if we want to and squeeze and aggressively lean the shaft forwards, because you've got tons of loft to work with, and especially with your short irons, you've got forward-leaning shafts by design. When it comes to your metalwoods, obviously, we don't want to encroach into that territory into this area. You don't want to be that side of the line. So, any other thought? Really, other than just a heck of a lot of keep doing what you're doing. Again, the way that left elbow folds backwards, chicken wingy, but I don't honestly think it's because, and I can remember saying this to you a little while ago, I think it's possibly more to do with the muscles in your neck not liking the exertion rather than the musculature around, the sinews and tendons around your hips. Compared to what I see on a daily basis, you've got quite a lot of, quite a lot of mobility in your midriff, in your hips. The only other possible explanation is if the center of your swing here, that center goes backwards and downwards. It certainly doesn't look like it's any closer to the green. You see that just the top of that circle, your shirt collar touching the top of that circle there. You know, I mean, maybe that little bit of loss of height into the forward swing and then stretching up, you know, that hyperextension of your left side, which is fulfilled by rotation as much as anything, which is absolutely crucially important. You know, you haven't lost a lot of height there, and you know, that might be one explanation for him. Maybe the left arm wants to sort of, the radius of your swing, your left arm wants to sort of bend a little bit to keep the club away from the ground and avoid you hitting it heavy. Might be one explanation. But I think if that left shoulder was further away from the ground, that would allow the left arm to be at its full length for what that's worth. But the constant and even rotation of that left arm, it sort of stops rotating a little bit, and instead of rotating sort of folds inwards and backwards, which is, you know, constant and even rotation would allow that left arm to stay at full length. I think I'll just show you a quick Adam Scott rendition. Slightly dark. I wish he hadn't been playing in the sun this day, but you can see quite a mega straight left arm. Not many people are flexible enough to do that, but we'll take you through it frame by frame. You know, the left arm at full length. You sort of feel like it's still at full length there, you know, rather than having disappeared behind his body and beginning to fold. But you can see how high up his left shoulder is there. At the same point in your swing, we tend to see the shoulders quite level, and I think that's one of the reasons the left elbow has to buckle. We see quite a lot of you know, the body's opened up and that left shoulder's quite high at this point. So yeah, always a bit of a conundrum to know exactly where the inflexibility, where that, you know, it's happening in very fleeting amounts of time, but very idiosyncratic. That's the only thing left with your swing that leads me to believe that you know, the checks and balances we've worked hard on up until present day. That's the only thing that looks in any way quirky. But then, you know, look at Lee Westwood. He loses loads of height in the way forwards and has a mega buckled left arm and makes those two things work together to control the low point in his swing that way. So, you know, it's not like we've got to let it hold us back, but it's probably the only way we could put the boot into your swing, I have to say. So yeah, we'd like some other footage with driver and such, just to run the rule over that. Make sure you're not doing anything detrimental. Might be nice to see some chipping from front on down the line in the net there. Yeah, some mid-sized shots, but just to keep tabs on that, just to check we don't run away down any dark alleys. All right, mate. I'll do a little piece to camera outside. It's night time when I'm filming this, so apologies for any continuity, because I'm going to take the rest of the night off and magically appear in front of the camera in a few seconds outside, but there will be in real time an elapse between the two. Okay, my dear chap, catch up with you soon.